how and why did I acquire my first loom? For years, my husband and I enjoyed going to craft shows. We actually started going to them probably before we got married. We like to walk up and down the aisles, talk with people, look at the beautiful things people created, and actually talk to the people who were making them and find out a little bit more about how they got involved and perhaps the process itself. One show, a long time ago, we walked down the aisle and there I saw someone weaving on a floor loom. When I was in high school, I started making my own clothing because I didn't want to wear what everyone else wore. So I was very used to cutting up fabric, going to the fabric store, finding really nice fabric and making things. Now here was a loom that I could not only weave on just for fun, I could create my own fabric. This particular small business is very similar to what I have today. It was a weaver who sold some weaving equipment. Well, I ordered the loom, and the loom that they sold came in pieces. I mean every piece, every nut and bolt, every wing nut, every screw. It came a few weeks later in a lot of boxes, and I put it all together with the help of my husband. Then once it was together, it was time to start to put the yarn on the loom. Of course, we didn't have those YouTube videos that everyone can pull up today. I had a book, and I remember trying to get the yarn on the loom following all the directions. It was probably very late at night, and it was in August, very hot outside, and I decided, I've had enough of this. I don't know what's going on. I'm having trouble. And my husband so nicely says to me, "Did you know that there is a hand weaving school? There's a sign every time we go to your mother's house up in Harrisburg. We go right by it, called the Mannings." Well, I probably saw the sign, but I had never really read it and never made the connection. Thankfully, he did. The next week, I signed up for a class, took a class with Mary Ann, and that's the rest of the story. Whatever your motivation is, you want to get a loom, and I'm going to talk about some of the things I've learned over the years. We're going to go into 3 different sections. Of course, first of all is your motivation. I'm not going to talk a lot about that because we each have a reason why we want to weave, purchase a loom. Maybe you already have one, you want another one, whatever the reason is. The first thing I'm going to talk about is what do you want to make? And I'll go over some of the items. The next thing will be your space in your house. Where are you going to house this new equipment? And the last is, what are the different kinds of looms that are available? Maybe it's some things out there that you never even realized were out there. So we're going to review each one of those. So let's get started on the first session. What it is that you want to make. So let's take a look at some of the items that you can weave. And you can weave these on many different looms, and sometimes you could maybe actually weave almost everything that I'm going to be showing you on one loom. And one of the things that's hard to determine is what you want to do and what you want to weave when you first start. Sometimes people say, I want to do everything, but then you find out that there's 1 or 2 things that you really like to do, and you want to make sure that the loom you have is the best loom. But let's first go through some of the items that I have on the table and take a look at them. First of all, I have some narrow straps. Maybe you are someone who would like to create some bands or straps for use on other products. Maybe you do tote bags, maybe you want to make belts, maybe something like that. So that's one item you could make and weave on a loom. Or perhaps you're someone who would like to do some towels. Another item maybe you're thinking of, like, oh, I really want to do some placemats, some table runners. That's really what I'd like to do. Or perhaps you're thinking of something bigger. Maybe you'd like to weave some blankets. Or maybe even something bigger yet. Maybe you'd like to make a bedspread or a tablecloth. Or maybe you're like myself, you decide, I just like to weave some yardage. And here's some yardage that I wove. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it, but perhaps you'd like to just weave yardage and then maybe make clothing or make something else out of it. Or perhaps you'd like to do something a little larger. Again, maybe a shawl of some kind. Maybe just like to make some scarves out of some of your hand-spun fiber. Or maybe you're like me, you like to make your own clothing, and you're going to actually take the fabric and cut it up and sew it. So maybe that's something you'd like to do. So let's just start to consider what it is you might like to create with a loom. And then we're going to move on to the next section as to how much space do you need, how much space do you have to house this new hobby that you decided you're going to try out. Space. How much space and room do you have to house your new hobby? Is it going to have its own little area in the house designated for crafts? Are you going to share it in another room, maybe your bedroom, maybe your dining room, maybe it's going to take over your living room? Let's consider size. I'm going to talk about individual looms next, but sometimes you look at advertisements and you see looms, and some of them are very, very large. Some of them seem small, and you're just not sure what you need. So I'm going to just show you if I started with a small loom, what I might need in addition to the loom, and how much space I might need. I'm going to use this small loom. This is a wolf pup from Shat, and it's a foldable loom, as you can see. You'll see more of the loom in the next session. But let's just talk about a few things. First of all, this loom is folded up. Isn't that great? And it has wheels on it that you can't see right now, but there's wheels, and I'm going to move it in a minute. So you do need the loom, and I'm going to move it around shortly. But you also need something to sit on. You don't necessarily need to have a bench made by a loom company, but benches are very nice, and you want an adjustable bench. So you're going to need the bench. Of course, you're going to need the room to put the bench on it. And also, just to give you an idea, this loom is not very wide. And again, I'm going to talk about width. It's about this wide. And again, it has wheels. Now, I'm going to open it up in the next, but you have to remember you have to open up the loom also to make room to walk around it. So you think, oh, I have room to put this in my house. Remember, you need to get all the way around the room for different tasks when you're getting your loom ready to use. So another thing to consider. So I have the bench here. I'm going to move that out of the way. And I'm going to show you that this one does have little wheels on it on the bottom. And I can wheel it out of the way and maybe put it in another part of the house. What else do you need? Well, gee, I think that's all I need. Well, there's something back here called a warping board. Now, sometimes people use warping pegs, and you can also warp your loom that way. With this, where are you going to hang it? Are you going to put it up, take it down, or whatever? You have to decide those kinds of things. Something else is yarn. Now, perhaps you are a knitter or a crocheter, and you've had yarns in skeins like this. You can use some of these, but you're going to find that weavers speak a different language, and we use yarn on cones. So you may end up getting involved in that. You can use some of your yarn that you use for knitting in some projects also. But there's also another transition that might happen in your life. What else do you need? Well, you do have something called a stick shuttle, but once you get into weaving, you might want something like this called a boat shuttle. And the boat shuttle has bobbins. Now, how am I going to get the yarn on the bobbins? Well, I could take one of these and I could hand wind that on there, but that is very, very time consuming. So now there's another gadget you might be interested in. It's a bobbin winder. It would save you some time. And of course, if you go a little bit farther than that, there's even electric ones. What else might you need? Well, there's these sticks. Yeah, they're just plain old sticks. Well, not really. There's holes on the end. They're called Lee sticks. Those you need to get the yarn on the loom. The other thing is a reed. Now, they come in different sizes, but you can use one for many different things. And each one of these, you put in the loom, take it out, and reuse it. But that's something you'll learn as you get involved in weaving. Then if you decide you want to work the loom one particular way, there's something called a rattle. So you'll have your rattle that you'll need to find a place to keep also. Those are just a few of the items that you might start to acquire if you decide to start weaving. Of course, it depends on what kind of weaving you're going to do, what kind of loom, and there's a whole other session out there called sectional looms, and that's a whole other set of equipment that you would need to purchase or have it come along with the loom when you purchase it. I just want to show you that there's more to weaving than just the loom. So again, something else for you to consider before you purchase a loom. And now we're going to move on to the next part, and I'm going to show you a few of the looms. I don't have every loom out there in my studio, so it'll just be a very limited sample of some of the looms that are available and what they can do for you. Now we're going to take a look at 4 looms. There are many other out there, many companies that you can purchase looms from. These looms are the ones that I happen to have either access to or they are mine. And I'm going to talk about each one individually in a moment. We have the one on the left that has 8 shafts and a lot of treadles underneath. We have a table loom. We have another smaller loom. And in the back in the corner, there's a rigid head loom. There are also other looms like inkle looms. There are looms that we call counterbalance. The 3 looms, the 2 floor looms, are jack looms, and basically the table loom is also. And in a sense, the rigid head works in a similar way. I'm going to start first with the table loom and talk a little bit more about how it operates and some of the features on table looms. All right, a table loom, and it's on a table. You can also purchase stands for looms. Some people want to make sure that whatever table loom you purchase, that it's comfortable to weave at. This particular loom has levers on the top that you move up and down. Some of them are on the side, depending on what you're doing. It has a beater back and forth. And what's kind of nice about a table loom is that you can control each one of these. Now, I didn't lock this in place. I just realized it's moving. It's much sturdier than it appears. You would move these up and down, throw your shuttle, and then you would maybe take these back up, and then you would go to the next one. Now, obviously, if you have issues that you can't, your legs are not, you're not able to use a treadle, this would be a wonderful loom to have. Again, the height of it. This one, I believe, is probably about 18 inches wide. They come smaller, they come wider. You can get other tables, you can get 4. Some of these come with 4 shafts, 8 shafts, 32, 24. That's a whole other world. Right now, just kind of looking at a loom. It's not necessary to get more shafts to begin with, and it goes back and forth like this. The other nice thing about this loom, it folds up. See if I can get it to fold up for me. It folds up like that, and it goes into a case. So that might be something else you might like to consider, that you can fold it up and put it away when you're not using it. And some people even fold them up and put them away when they're in the middle of their weaving because they need to get out of the way. So that's one sample of a table loom. There's a lot out there, a lot of companies. This one happens to be made by Leclerc. and this is a rigid heddle loom. This loom is ready to weave, double weave. It has 2 of these rigid heddles on it. Most of rigid heddle looms come with 1 rigid heddle, and the idea is to thread the slot, the hole, the slot, the hole, and as you move the reed up and down, you're either raising the slots or the threads in the holes, one or the other. This loom is on a stand that I purchased to put the loom on. You don't need a stand, you can put it on a table. Sometimes people lean against it as they weave. This one also comes in a narrow. I think you can go down almost to 10 inches. I'm not sure. There's different companies. This one happens to be made by Kromsky. You can get smaller ones. This one's 20 inches, I think. You can get 36 inch, again, depending on the space you have. And this one you can warp without using the warping board. There's something called using a peg, direct warping is what it's called. That's another option. And this one folds up in half and also goes into a little tote bag. Not all rigid heddles do. Again, this is a nice one if you have space issues and you just want to get started. There's a lot out there, and we'll talk more about that in another session. I'll be talking about used equipment. So that's a rigid heddle loom, or one sample, I should say. Now let's take a look at this loom. This one's called a wolf pup. Different between the other 2. That you use your feet to raise the shafts to make patterns. This one has 4 shafts. It's about 18 inches wide. Now what we call this one is direct tie-up. And the reason it's direct tie-up, it's because it's kind of hard for me since I'm standing to raise 2 shafts more than 1 at a time. I cannot do it unless I put both feet down. The idea is that you're going to maybe weave with 2 at a time or 1 at a time back and forth. And I'm going to show you another loom. So that's something, if you see a loom and you see that there's only 1 cord attached to each of the treadles, this would be considered a direct tie-up. This is a jack loom. Again, the beater goes back and forth. This one folds up in space. They do come wider, and I'm going to show you the next loom that I happen to have is a baby wolf. Again, folds up nicely, weave on it, put it away. Also remember that even though this is narrow, you could make wider products on it by sewing things together. You have to think a little bit differently when you're looking at looms. So that's the wolf pup. There are other companies out there that make similar looms. And the last loom we're going to take a look at today is another jack loom. This one has more of these shafts. And I want you to take a look. I'm not sure if you can see it or not. I'll move the loom a little bit. If I press one of the treadles, more than 1 of the shafts come up at a time, opposed to the other loom. So this one is not a direct tie-up. You can tie up and do a lot of things. The width on this weaving width, I believe, is 26 inches wide. They make a Mighty Wolf and floor loom and other looms that go up from 36 to 45. You can even go up to 54 to 60. I've even seen a loom that was even larger than that for rug weaving, which I did not really talk a lot about rug weaving. But you can weave rugs on these lightly. There are other looms that are better for long-term weaving of rugs, and I'll talk about that when I talk a little bit more about the buying used looms in the next session. So again, this is a nice one. This one also folds up. There are other companies, lots and lots of companies out there that you can find a loom like this. It's not necessary to have all of these. A lot of people feel you need, the more of these you have, the more shafts you have, the wider the loom, the better. Not necessarily. Again, you can weave wider things on this. It's called double weave. You can also weave panels and sew them together. You have to think a little bit differently when you start looking at looms out there. So that's basically the end of my discussion on looms and things to consider before you purchase a loom. Thank you for watching. Things to consider prior to purchasing a loom. If you have any additional questions or comments, please feel free to email me. You can contact me through my Facebook Messenger page. You can also contact me through my Etsy shop. I'd be happy to share any other information and perhaps help you in your new journey into weaving. Again, thank you so much.